Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You will hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Some of the best rural innovation doesn't come out of a grant or a big initiative. It comes out of one educator looking at their campus and saying, we can do more with what we have. Before we jump in, though, if you value these kinds of rural stories and practical ideas, hit that subscribe button on the Rural Scoop. It helps other rural educators find the show, and it helps keep us elevating what's working in small places. I'm excited today to be joined by Mrs. Erin Iler Smith, a rural educator in Chattooga County, Georgia, who's built something both practical and powerful. A greenhouse and a green learning space that's become an instructional tool, a community partnership hub, and a bridge into the middle and high school agricultural pathway. In a community where ag is part of the local economy, Erin's work connects learning to workforce development in ways that students can actually see and touch. And just as important, it strengthened the school's reputation and relationships in the community. So let's get into it. Erin, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Well, I want to start with your story and why this work matters to you. Can you start with what brought you into teaching and really what pulled you toward building this kind of hands-on place-based learning?
Well, back in college, when I was making my decision about what I wanted to do, I had several family members that were teachers in different capacities. My grandfather was an art teacher who became the head of the art department at the college that I went to in Statesboro, another rural community. And as part of his work and what he did, his classroom experience was a little bit different. And part of I really enjoyed my college time, and I kind of thought a collegiate career pathway would sort of be where I would lead myself. And along the way, that sort of changed trajectory when two of my cousins who are a little bit older than I am became teachers, and I was able to sort of help them set up their classrooms for the first time while I was still in school. And that was something that I really enjoyed and got a lot of excitement out of. And it's a lot less stressful doing that when it's not your classroom, now that I've learned. But at the time, they just seemed so excited about what they were doing, and it excited me to make that decision too. And they had young kids, and getting to spend time with them was just something I really enjoyed. And I thought, oh, well, there is a career pathway where I can spend time with kids and I can talk about stuff that I love to learn about. And that's sort of what led me in that direction. And Georgia Southern's program really has a great span where they put you in lots of experiences. So I wasn't just stuck in one grade level my whole time. I changed between kindergarten through fifth grade the whole time I was part of that program. So it gave me a big, vast expanse of what I'd like to do.
Yeah. Was there a moment when you realized that your students really needed something more tangible and connected to their world, what was out in their community?
Yes. So when I first started teaching, I was teaching in Metro Atlanta inside of Marietta City, which is in a neighboring community of where I grew up going to school in Cobb County. And it's not a very rural place. It's a very cityscape with small yards and not a very ag-based area. And at that school, we had some gardens that were established by someone else. And for one of my classes, I was teaching a STEM class, and it happened to be primarily about soil. And when I had the chance to engage with my students in that, soil is something that there's only so many experiences you can do to help them understand different types of soil and why that matters. So we had the first opportunity to kind of go and revive those gardens, and we used different types of soil and measured the success rate of the same plants. I didn't think it would excite my kids because plants were important to me, and it was we got to do two things at once. We got to fix the school garden, and we got to engage in something that I could share with my students. And them being able to see that you can't just put plants in the ground and they'll live. was a very like eye-opening experience for them. And it was interesting to me that being in such a cityscape, the kids were interested in that type of thing, especially being so young, you know. And where we live now, the students in such a rural community, I thought they would be well-versed in ag and well-versed in the farming community and gardens. And that was absolutely not the case. So I kind of got the opportunity to really flip the script. And instead of just being on soil types, revive a garden that had not really been part of our school. And the kids loved being out there, but it was like literally concrete and some like overgrown garden beds that were broken. And we had the opportunity to go out there and just observe and collect some information, spend time. And I realized that that was a space that they wished was functional. And it was a space that could invite so much learning. And nobody wanted to be stuck in a classroom. It was post-COVID. So they were kind of tired of being isolated, I think. And that was when I realized like this experience could maybe be shared here too, but in a different capacity.
Yeah. So that's how the greenhouse idea began. What was the problem that you were trying to solve, Erin? And what was the first step that you took toward moving forward?
So, well, with a garden or greenhouse or really any of those spaces, you have to develop something out of nothing. And in the area that the pre-existing garden had been and had been neglected, we had the opportunity to sort of transform the space. But with that, you know, the first problem comes from like a lack of funding and not being able to necessarily personally cover the cost of expenses for that. So I was new to the community and had to engage myself in reaching out to partners who could help and contribute. And I was really pleased to see how many people were invested in that. Local businesses that I was familiar with where I had previously lived, but didn't engage with in this capacity, like Tractor Supply and a local nursery, a local mulch and soil place. And having that be part of like the backbone, I really saw that people wanted a better experience for our students at our school. Or maybe not a better experience, but a different experience. And that was the first like hurdle to gain support in establishing the space. And once that happened, different grant opportunities came to be, and you go along the process of developing that and transforming the space again with the funding that you can have and the students you have access to. Mm-hmm. And that can also be tricky because your student body may or may not be invested in what you're doing. And having one defined class of students that I worked with only one class really limited the actionable outcome that we had. When I had the opportunity to teach the whole grade as their writing teacher, I had a lot more students in each class at different parts of the day that were really invested. And I could maximize that and see how it would affect different groups of students, although we were working towards the same common goal. Mm-hmm. And over the years, like I was working on the garden since I started working there, which was the year 21, 22. So we had just a green space with pavers and some little garden beds. And with the garden expanding at the rate of the student needs expanding, we had to transform our space. We were a little bit limited with just being able to garden really in the springtime because we didn't have a greenhouse. We didn't have a classroom to put things. So one of my first projects was just finding the space and being able to dedicate the funding, the time, and the resources to get a greenhouse assembled and to used by our students. And finally, I was able to get that kind of secured at the end of last year and brought into fruition for this school year, allowing us to kind of have a garden space that was active all year long.
Can you walk us through how the greenhouse functions as a place for instruction? What does a lesson look like when you're using that space well?
Well, I think that the keyword there would be using the space well and also having teachers who are comfortable going out there to just try. Mm-hmm. This year I had the opportunity to engage with some teachers to build like a mini garden committee where it was teachers who wanted to learn more about how to use the space, but didn't exactly feel like they were a master gardener or had the tools to do it. So one of the things I spent some time doing at the end of the last school year and through the summer was developing resources that were already available and ready-made, like garden curriculum, lesson plan ideas, all the tools that they would need, with the garden being really the only exception. So giving teachers the empowerment to feel like you can come out here and you can use this space. Like, it doesn't have to be just with me. If you'd like me to be present, I'm happy to be part of it. But if you want to engage in this experience with your students, there's a lot of ownership in that. We want our students to have agency. It's important for us to model that too. Mm-hmm. And we also want to show them that, like, maybe it's okay to try things that we're not considered an expert in, which encourages them to also pursue things that, like, they wouldn't naturally gravitate towards. So using the space well could look really different depending on the students that you have. Younger grades are using it more for very basic foundations of, like, garden-based learning. Like, you put a bean in the soil and we come out next week and we hope we see a sprout after we provide it with water. But oh goodness, it got really dry and we thought we watered it enough. And what do we see? The bean's not sprouting. So what can we do to try again? And that's a part of garden-based learning, and also with kids. Mm-hmm. Sometimes resources don't go the way that you plan, and things don't live the way that you hope. But that's part of the kids being engaged and going through trial and error, because that's a real thing that even master gardeners experience, right? You can't control all the factors. So the space, the garden area in itself has some tables where students can sit and work. There's six tables with 8 students can sit at them. So about 48 students could be out there at one time, which in our case is about 2 classes, which gives a class to have a partnership, possibly with an older grade level. If they're K2, they could partner with a 3-5 class. And in this year, we were able to establish a mentorship program where we had our 3-5 students working with our FFA students at the high school for the first half of the year, and then also students from the middle school in the spring. With being able to engage with our 3-5 students during their specials time. And it wasn't just like a class that took place in the garden. It was true hands-on garden learning where we were working on assembling shelves or plant trays, or working on our water problem, which was designing irrigation systems to meet the expansion of our garden that really can't be done with just one hose and a limited water supply.
Mm-hmm. So those are adjustments that really made a big difference for access points for different grade levels and different content areas. That's exciting. Your principal, when she talks about this, emphasized that you really built this as an inclusive learning space. And it sounds like you made some choices so that all students can participate and succeed.
Yeah, I am glad to know that that's how it appears, because that was part of the point of that. We have a lot of students with diverse learning needs at our school, and specifically a high population of students with disabilities. And when I first started building the garden, that was the thing I noticed, was it was not accessible to everyone within our school. Even some students that were wheelchair bound, or some students that just had a one-on-one peer row. There was no walkability. There was no way for those students to have a place to sit if they needed to take a break. We have different heights of different things. We have sensory elements that I've put in, and different types of seating. If, maybe the grass is not your thing, but you want to be out there, and you don't want to be with the bugs. That's a thing I've learned that I needed to consider. And I'm glad that the tools that I've given students to feel safe in the garden are things that they've naturally developed ownership of, and they gravitate towards, versus their teachers, like, mandating that sort of experience.
Now, Erin, you mentioned that you leverage partnerships with your local community members and agencies. How did you approach that kind of work, that ask, so that it felt collaborative rather than transactional, which is sometimes how, as a teacher, felt like, okay, I need some money from you. Can you give me some money? How did you make sure there was a collaboration rather than just that one transaction?
So since the time that I guess prior to building community relationships, like with businesses, I was still new to the school district when I first came there. So having grant opportunities that sort of encouraged me to push beyond my normal interactions, like I don't enjoy asking people for things. especially being a person who's affiliated with a school, but like very unfamiliar with the area. And I didn't want there to feel like there was a tie that would be disconnected, especially because there was a garden that was already built and people had already helped in the past. And I didn't want them to feel like we're going to contribute to a project that maybe will come to a standstill. So since I've initially created all of the communication opportunities, I reached out to community vendors with letters. And they were attached from the school, and this was years ago. And then I've done it since to continue to receive donations or to meet the expansion needs of our students. Lots of local businesses over the years, they've donated seeds to us when they just have a surplus or when they're no longer able to be shelved, but they still have plenty of use and life to them. Benches from the FFA programs have been donated to us in addition to purchases. So community partnerships I made by attending like ag events or FFA nights as a guest, or like this holiday wreath making class I would go to for myself. And I made a lot of connections with the Farm Bureau. I made some connections with young farmers in the 4-H office. And through that, it gave me the opportunity to have connections that I felt like I wasn't just having a transactional partnership with, but we became professional colleagues who also became personal friends. So I got the chance to work with people who also share a passion for the same profession, but also the same, understand my investment in the outcome beyond just that transaction.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful parts of this story, Erin, is how the greenhouse really does connect the middle school and high school ag programs together. How did you go about building that alignment across grade levels? Because that is not easy work.
It took a lot of thinking, and I'm really grateful that, like I said, this garden was established and then worked on continuously for the last few years. And I'm grateful for the very initial support in this from my principal, Dr. Hanriam, because she advocated for this space to be transformed and like supported me in doing that. And previous administration had supported me through the application and support of grants and the funding that could be advertised, and of course having our kids contribute. But I think what she offered that I hadn't really been presented to me before was there's got to be people in the community who will come help you with this. And it kind of seemed like I've had some great friends who've helped me along the way with watering, helping me with weed whacking when we need to. But like for a long time, it was my students and I kind of managing that, which meant it was just me when school was not in session. And that's a lot to juggle. And from there, having the opportunity to see, okay, well, let's meet with my people who I built these connections with. And I asked them in the summer to come and meet and talk. And so having that strong foundation of both a professional and personal relationship with the people who would be huge stakeholders for a project mentorship situation was a big ask. And they were willing to come meet on a summer workday when they didn't have to. And they were willing to come meet with me and hear my ideas and support whatever they could. And like I said, they've kind of contributed their support in previous ways throughout this whole process, through, their programs and affiliations as well, whether it was donations of funding or monetary donations, I guess, and then donations of time and items. So when they had given their support in moving forward with this project, then I kind of set the tone for how we're going to move forward with what students and with Dr. Hanrahan's support, we kind of came up with the opportunity. We have 6 classes on each grade level. And with that, we thought if we could do 6 visits, we would touch each of those classes as they came through their time when they would go to the garden. And some teachers, spend a lot more time in the garden than others, but for the teachers that don't, this gave every student in those grades the chance to be part of it. So, with the creation of the greenhouse that was set in place by the high school FFA, they helped construct it at the end of the school year last year. We had a little bit of a tragedy with our greenhouse as it was making its way to our school, kind of fell apart on the road.
Uh-oh.
That was this unexpected challenge. But thankfully, through some community partnerships, we had another family who was willing to donate the purchase of a new one. And then I had those same people who helped put it together in the first place come and help assemble it again. So it was there and ready for our students to use. And as much as I would have loved for our students to be part of the actual greenhouse assembly, there were a lot of parts and a lot of pieces and bigger than what our kids would be. So they had their hand in other capacities. But once the greenhouse was there, we had students who helped assemble shelves. We had students who helped organize things and also reconfigure the garden because now we have this space occupied by a greenhouse. So kids were digging up soil, putting in wheelbarrows from existing garden beds, relocating them to another place that they thought would be better suited. And in all of that time, the high school FFA students, they're about 10 to 12, and there are about 24 kids in those 3rd through 5th grade classes. So we essentially had one person per 2 students, and they get to have like a peer-to-peer interaction. And they kind of, that was their person to ask questions, to share ideas. So building their communication skills along the way of giving this garden a makeover and kind of a facelift. But they had the guidance of people who started where they were and has developed their leadership into this position where they got the opportunity to come and speak with our kids. And the middle school kids got towards the end and see that sort of the beginning of what that could look like for them in the future.
Erin, in rural places, workforce development has to be real. It can't be theoretical, something that's not connected to the community. How are you and other teachers at your school helping students really connect learning in the greenhouse to real jobs and the local economy?
Well, I think that through the opportunity to engage with those students, they're able to see, especially when the middle school students came, they're able to see this pathway that's like not far from them. Because middle school is really the first time, since we don't have an ag program in elementary, like a formal one. We have 4-H come and they do certain experiences with our 5th grade students. Farm Bureau visits primary grade levels, but it's not necessarily targeted for a career pathway. It's just exposure. We've got a lot of great resources within the community that come, like the mobile dairy, but it's not presented from the lens of like, hey, this is a career you could have. But some kids are going to interpret it that way. But having the chance to see in real life a choice that these students made in school, knowing that these students have school ahead of them, sort of allows them to see that like STEM kind of gets this rap of it being fun and creative projects. But STEM is also fun and creative projects that happen to be connected to like CTAE pathways. The engineering that students have where they're in the garden, specifically like reconfiguring a garden bed, well, that's kind of a pathway to ag mechanics. And ag mechanics might be something a student didn't know was an option, and now they know that our high school has a program for it. Some students just love planting things and watching them grow. Well, then there's a horticulture pathway for you. So it sort of opens up lots of available resources that were there for our students, but they didn't know to access them or didn't know necessarily that they were within reach, I think is more of where that kind of came from. And there wasn't like a formal push or intentional targeting of those professions, but it was also a really great introductory opportunity for students to see hands-on in real time. Hey, I really like this. How could this help me with what I choose to do when I go to the middle school since I'm in 5th grade? Seeing 8th graders now, after they come visit, they're getting ready to make their plans for high school. It sort of made that future a lot less like distant and a lot more tangible.
Now, your principal said that your work has upgraded the school's reputation in the community, which is amazing. What would you say you've noticed that has changed in how families and community members talk about the school?
I think that people are just getting the impression that it's a good place to be. And there's a lot more visibility. I think that in the time that I've been there from, I was lucky to come post-COVID time where everything was kind of like resetting itself. And then we're reestablishing norms. And that's now sort of transitioned into ways where we're trying to re-engage with communities in the full capacity that people were previously. Having parents present in the buildings for school council or for community events. engaging with our preschool students, letting them come tour the school, but also spend time in the garden. Our preschool students came this year, and I got to bring some of my second grade kids to help paint rocks, which doesn't sound very gardening, but we painted rocks within the garden with washable paint, of course. And we let their rocks dry, and I still have to finish a few, but my students helped me paint them with like weatherproofing so that then I could label what was in the garden with the pre-K student rocks. So now when they come in kindergarten, like they can go, I mean, if they remember their rock, they can go out there and be like, oh my gosh, I'm part of this garden. And I didn't even know. So sort of like, I think just the inclusivity of a community, being something that is really what we're all reaching towards, and have high standards for our students, have high standards for our staff. And I think like people are rising to meet those expectations. And I think that the community is also seeing that. And I'm glad that the garden gets to be part of that. But I would say that it's a smaller part of a bigger culture within our school.
Yeah. Now, Erin, you mentioned that it's a lot of work, especially during the summer, to take care of this garden and all of the different parts of it. Can you talk a little bit about how you organized your work so that it didn't overwhelm your teaching role? I mean, what systems did you put in place so that it's sustainable and not really dependent just on you?
Well, I think it was a lesson in, for myself, like learning my own personal sustainability. Because I'm so passionate about being in the garden, it's hard for me sometimes to realize how much work it requires. But it does, and it is. And I think in the past, I've been able to kind of like ignore that because I've been so invested in the work for my kids. And not to say that this year I was not invested, but I realized that I had the opportunity that, you know, what if one day I'm not leading this garden? I need to know that there are people who can, and that this will thrive if I'm not physically out there, or if I'm not physically leading the charge. And I think that's what I really appreciated the most about the opportunity to initiate this mentorship this year, because it allowed me to realize that there are people who value the space and that they will care for it, whether I'm physically out there with them or not. Of course, I enjoyed going to check in and see some former students and take pictures. But I think knowing this year that I had the weight of my shoulders was not just carrying the garden, or that's what I meant, but you know what I'm trying to say. And having my coworkers who have shared with me, yes, they support this garden and they think it's great, but not necessarily having an actual outcome. And then this year they were out there with their kids. They were out there taking pictures of their students when it was their time to be in the garden, instead of that having to be also my job. And I think I really appreciated the natural leadership that people took to make sure that this mentorship was effective. And that's something that, more importantly, not just effective now, but could be sustainable for the future, given another initiative. You know, we accomplished our goal of what we wanted to do this year with coming up with a way to make the garden less work for everybody by having a water system that is rain reservoirs, and by having little drip irrigation run through our beds. Nobody has to stand there with a hose for a long time. And by this one, I mean a singular hose in a very large space. So now time is saved from anyone who goes out there. And one of the things I've really appreciated towards the end of the school year, and even since the school year's ended, is I've had people message me and say, hey, it's not rained. I filled up the rain barrels for you and I turned them on, so the garden's got a good water. Like, that has not happened before. So the actionable like initiation of people showing that they care more about this space, now that maybe they see the impact that it has on their students, is, I think, the best way I can say that I think I've done what I needed to do to get the buy-in.
Yeah. If you were going to do this all over again and start tomorrow fresh, having had the experience that you have up to this point, what would you do differently?
Well, I actually had an opportunity to think about that recently. 2 days ago, today's Friday. On Wednesday, I presented at the local STEM forum, and I talked about this project to help inspire other people to possibly set parameters to have their own projects in their gardens. And, you know, if this is a need, then great. You know, this was successful, but there were some things I would change. And one of those things in retrospect is the STEM conversation and the discussion, the STEM project-based hands-on learning is invaluable. There's nothing that can take that away. And its impact reaches far beyond what we can measure typically in our own classrooms. But what I would change is I would make sure to have some sort of transactional like supports with journals and reflection aspects so that the students could either bring what they've learned from outside back into their classrooms with a little bit more meaning, whether it's about irrigation or, plant adaptations or plants that thrive better in the greenhouse versus plants that can be out unprotected, whatever it is, because there's so many pathways you can use, even if it's tallying colors of different insects or different flowers. Having that tool for teachers to not have to find something for their kids, but knowing that they have, oh, hey, we've got a place in our school we can just use the garden folders and we can collect our data and we can talk about it and we can write about it, more importantly. I think making it more transferable from the garden back into the classroom would be something I would advocate for if I were to do this again. And I hope to do this mentorship again and continue to build this, but with a different project in mind, now that we have tools that we didn't have before.
What direction are you going to go?
That's a great question. A couple different ways. I was thinking more about finding ways to heat the greenhouse so that we can have it like really widen the variety of plants that we can grow within our garden. Because right now it's just kind of like, it's hot in there, but like there is no heating system, and there are natural ways to do that, with balancing mulch and the carbon cycle and things that are well beyond, and nitrogen as well, well beyond kind of like my scope of expertise. And I would really need the high school teachers who are well versed in that to help me. So that would be a cool way to engage not just the ag teachers and the FFA teachers, but the science teachers who could open that pathway for students to realize like biology and chemistry are happening in real life places like gardens and farms. And so maybe that might be where I think about a better way to keep the garden functional during the off season.
Yeah.
Which is a small period of time, but it's like a lot of time when we're at school.
Sure it is. Now, if a rural teacher or principal who's listening to this wants to create a similar learning space, what would you recommend that they start with? What are those first things that they should be considering or doing?
Well, the first tip, and this was something I also had talked about at my STEM forum, kind of helping make this big scope more approachable. First with starting small. You can't make a garden overnight, especially if you don't have one and you want to create a space. Start in a small area. Could be planters. It could be one singular ground bed. It could be pots for each class. Some way to start small that's not incredibly costly, because that can be a really huge expense and you're not able to continue to sustain it. The other thing would be, if you have a vision, you have a plan, reach out to people who are around you, because there are people who want to help and there are people who will listen. You just have to reach your audience. And I think the other thing that people have to remember is projects like this can be a lot, and there are people and businesses who are willing to extend their resources, their funds, and their time. But they have to know that it's going to be bigger than just right then. So while you have to start small, you sort of have to think beyond. Like, what do you want this to be? How do you want this to continue? Why would this be good for the current group of students, but also those to come? And that's not a formal plan. It's just a thought process. And that way it makes it authentic and something someone would value investing in, whether it's financially or through items or through their time. And I think being able to really ensure that a garden is a lot of times a very passive space. It's a space that's a classroom that's not inside. And we go out there and we enjoy it and we sit and we relax, which is great. And it's good for schools to have for a number of reasons. I enjoy that aspect of our garden, but I also enjoy the aspect of a space like that allows for authentic interdisciplinary learning without a lot of work. A space that allows for our school to feel inclusive and feel like they had a part in it with just a seed. It doesn't have to be a huge thing to transform a student's experience, when they get their chance to put their hands in it. So for anybody looking to do this in the future, thinking about who do you want to directly impact? Maybe not the whole school at once, but maybe just 3-5, maybe just a grade level you teach in, and then allowing yourself to move forward with that trajectory gives you sort of the next step for the rest of where you go. If it's just one grade, you could reach out to a lot of resources. That's just about 100 students. If it's a school like mine. But then if it's beyond that, now you've got a lot more kids to consider. You've got logistics to follow. You've got a plan in place because you can't have everybody out there at once. Otherwise, it's a mess and it's a lot less effective. I know they say more hands make less work. Not always in a garden. Because they can't. But at the same time, more hands do make less work, and you have other people who are willing to share their ideas and come in and invest and say, hey, I heard about your project. I'd love to donate a raised bed. Okay, well, a raised bed is a different type. You've got soil, all kinds of catalysts for how you move forward. If someone's like, I will donate gloves, that's a great start. Okay, so we're going to be putting our hands in something, and if they're going to donate seeds, awesome. I'm going to get some seed starter. And then we'll go from there. Like maybe they don't live and that's a bust and we got to try again. Because, this weather is insane. Right now it's drowning everything. Previously it was drying everything out. So not like recommending not doing it in the summertime for sure.
Erin, I always end with the same question, and that is, what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
Well, to think about that, I'm currently pursuing my Tier 1 certification, and I'm in a class about leadership diversity. And last night, one of our sessions was talking about privilege and rural communities. I think one thing that's totally different, like hearing rural advantage sounds very positive. And I think a lot of times when people think rural, they automatically think negative. They think about not being privileged to city life and access to resources. And there is a part of that. But a privilege or a disadvantage isn't something necessarily to be shamed or unashamed of. And I think when we think about the area that we're in, this is a place that has so many opportunities for students, maybe not the most accessibility to city life and busy restaurants at your fingertips of every food option in the world. But there are so many pathways that students can have just by being where we are, through businesses that they can meet, seeing people that thrive here, communities that don't exist within a metro area. And having had the ability to grow up in a metro suburban space and then moving here was an eye-opening experience that I originally thought, oh, I don't know if this is a good fit for me. And then I was able to realize the availability for some of these students and accessibility that they have for careers beyond things I didn't have exposure to. I did not have a CTAE pathway at my high school. It was like auto tech, I think. That was it. Or you were college prep. These students, they have so much available to them that is based in the space that they live in. And I think that is a huge advantage to see how farming and everything that goes in our grocery stores is happening right around us. And our families are parts of it, or people we know, or that's your friend's farm. And there are things that they never really thought about. But also the entire space in this rural community is not to be a space that's lacking in any way. It's a space that's highly privileged with the tools and the accessibility that it has to these things that could teach so many people far and beyond the farming world and reach so many people who are engineers and welders and things far beyond our space that could impact so much greater.
Yeah, well said. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Erin, I want to thank you because what you've built is absolutely more than a greenhouse. It's really an example of how rural schools can connect learning to place. That place-based aspect is something that is grounded in purpose and partnership with the community. And you've really shown what it looks like when instruction and community relationships and workforce alignment all reinforce each other instead of competing for time. So thank you for spending some time with me and talking about what it is you're doing there in Georgia.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, friends, if this episode gave you an idea you can use, do 2 quick things. First, please hit the subscribe button to the Rural Scoop so that you don't miss rural bright spots as they come out, like this one. Subscribing helps others find us. And we also want to make sure that you share this episode with an educator who would love this kind of practical, place-based innovation. I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf, and remember, in rural leadership, our strength is our shared story. When we lead together, we thrive together. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning in to the rural advantage.